Well, I was thinking if I should just do like a cheesy intro, like "Welcome to Puritan Dunstan," but every time I get called that in real life, I get a little bit embarrassed. Oh, it's cheesy, right? But today's book review, All Things for Good. So also another book by Thomas Watson. Thankfully, much shorter than the most recent video I've done. The one before was, The Godly Man's Picture. That was 277 pages. This one's about half of that, so this is only 136 pages. Relatively short, but still full of goodness. So you can see there, still a fair amount of notes. And here, if I can give you a brief overview of the chapters. Actually, maybe I should start with the verse. Romans 8:28. So we know that all things work together for good to them who love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. So this whole book, All Things for Good, Thomas Watson is basically going through, how does God work all things for good? Things, for good, it's a little bit more obvious. God uses good for our good. Great. But how about affliction? What about, times where we're going under like a fiery trial? How does God use that for our good? So he goes through quite a bit, talks about, the best things work for good to the godly. So a little bit of like the nature of God first and foremost. And then he goes into, here the greatest question really. Why do these worst things, affliction, temptation, desertion, like God sort of leaving you, sin, how does God work those things for your good? Then he moves into, the love of God. Here, he has a lot of subpoints. So I'm just going to go through it briefly. If you wanted to pause and take a look at the chapters, that's good. So encouragements to love God afterwards. Effectual calling. So effectual, God's call has power to do what it intends to do. So if you're called according to God's purpose, then God, he will work all things for good. He's going to keep you as well. You're not going to fall before your trials. So exhortations again, if you're called. And then, what is God's purpose in all this? So, fairly brief overview. But again, Watson, he's full of gems of just talking about how does God use affliction? Because again, in our day and age, affliction is just something that people are like allergic to. The moment any sense of like pain comes, right away, please take it away. And in that sense, this book is a bit like, if you watch some of my other reviews, it's like a crook in a lot. It's a bit like contentment. It's the same theme of, if you see affliction, if you're undergoing trial, then endure it. Endure it and look to God and justify God's name in all of it. So I can go to the first quote for today. Here, in the context of affliction, what good is it? What good is God trying to do through affliction? And here, says, afflictions work for good as they are the means of making the heart more upright. In prosperity, the heart is it's prone to be divided. The heart cleaves partly to God and partly to the world. It is like a needle between two lodestones. Lodestones there means like magnets. God draws and the world draws. So the God attracts, the world attracts. Now God takes away the world that the heart may cleave more to him in sincerity. Correction is a setting the heart right and straight. As we sometimes hold a crooked rod over the fire to straighten it, so God holds us over the fire of affliction to make us more straight and upright. Oh, how good it is when sin has bent the soul awry from God, that affliction should straighten it again. And then on the next page, I'm not sure if I have it. I don't have it. Afflictions work for good as they conform us to Christ. God's rod is a pencil to draw Christ's image more lively upon us. So there, the first purpose of affliction is to draw us closer again to God. So if you're going through a period of affliction, of trial, of suffering, most likely it's, if you're looking at it in a godly manner, it is pulling your heart away from this love of like worldly things. Because he says, your heart, it's cleaved, it looks to God and it looks to worldly things. You're being pulled two ways. But when God sends that affliction upon you, the pull of the world just, it's so much less. You see life as it should be. You're not living for this world. you see how much better God is than the things of this world. So it's a correction. It sets your heart straight. It makes you more as who God created you to be. And if you're called according to his purpose, then you're to be conformed to the image of Christ. And these afflictions, they will make you more like Christ. And he offers some words of comfort here too. So temptations for the Christian, it's a time when you are just beaten and bruised. He might allow Satan to buffet you a little bit, to assault you. But temptations, they work for good, as God makes those who are tempted fit to comfort others in the same distress. A Christian must himself be under the buffetings of Satan before he can speak a word in due season to him that is weary. And then jumping down to point 4, down to here, temptations work for good, as they stir up paternal compassion in God to them who are tempted. The child who is sick and bruised is most looked after. When a saint lies under the bruising of temptations, Christ prays, and God the Father pities. When Satan puts his soul into a fever, God comes with a cordial, which made Luther say that temptations are Christ's embraces, because he then most sweetly manifests himself to the soul. So there, as Christians, you're better able to comfort others who undergo the same kinds of affliction, temptation, but even more than that, you, as someone who is just, in a weaker and poor condition, if human parents can have pity on the child who is sick, won't God have even more pity on you if you are beaten and bruised spiritually? Doesn't God have so much more affection for you? And here, Thomas Watson, he answers that affirmatively. Yes, Christ does. God does. Christ, he prays for you. He's always praying for you. But even more so during these times of temptation, that you would not fall into it, but that you would grow from it. And in God the Father, he pities you. That fatherly care in God cannot help but just see, right? Oh, my poor child is suffering. He is near always to the brokenhearted. He knows our sorrows. So there's comfort if you are undergoing affliction. You must remember Romans 8:28, all things are working together for my good. I'm called according to his purpose. So God, he will deliver on that. And then here, what if God isn't? What if God is not near? So these desertions, when God leaves you, here he says, point 3, these desertions are but for a time. Christ may withdraw and leave the soul a while, but he will come again. In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee. Isaiah 57:16. When it is dead, low water, the tide will come in again. I will not be always wroth. I think angry there. I will not always be angry. For the spirit should fail before me in the souls which I have made. Isaiah 37:16. The tender mother sets down her child in anger, but she will take it up again into her arms and kiss it. God may put away the soul in anger, but he will take it up again into his dear embraces and display the banner of love over it. So here God, though he deserts you for a bit, he takes away this presence away from you. I believe William Bridge talks about that too in Lifting Up of the Downcast. But there's a purpose to this withdrawal of his presence. It's to make his own presence much more sweet. So he's not going to leave you forever, just for a short time. Tiny little bit of time, just like how the tide, there's a low tide, then there's a high tide. The tide will come back. So will God. He will leave you for a little bit, and there you'll think more fondly again of his presence, of how good it is to be near God. And God, he will be far more sweeter to you. And this kind of desertion, it works for the good of the godly. It makes the saints prize God's countenance more than ever. Psalm 63:3, he quotes on the next page. Thy loving kindness is better than life. God's loving kindness is better than life itself. God's presence, God's fellowship, communion with God, that's far better than life itself. So desertion, though it's another difficult thing to endure, it is how God uses it for your good. It might not feel like you're good to be separate from God for a short period of time, but sometimes it's what we need. Again, our hearts are just so drawn to the world, to our own sin, but Christ, but God, He knows what we need. So sometimes if He has to take away His own presence from us, He will, but He won't do it forever. Just for a short period of time, until you learn just how much better it is to have God's presence, to have God's loving kindness, than to have those worldly things. And then here, I thought this was one of the best quotes from Watson from this book. And here he says, "You may overlove the creature. You may love wine too much, and silver too much. But you cannot love God too much. If it were possible to exceed, excess here were a virtue. But it is our sin that we cannot love God enough. How weak is thy heart?" Ezekiel 16:30. So it may be said, how weak is our love to God? It is like water of the last drawing from the still, which has less spirit in it. If we could love God far more than we do, yet it were not proportionate to His worth, so that there is no danger of excess in our love to God. You may love worldly things, and they die and leave you. Riches take wings, relations drop away. There is nothing here abiding. The creature has a little honey in its mouth, but it has wings, it will soon fly away. But if you love God, He is a portion forever. As He is called a sun for comforts, so a rock for eternity. He abides forever. Thus we see it is better to love God than the world. If it is better to love God than the world, surely also it is better to love God than sin. What is there in sin that any should love it? Sin is a debt. Forgive us our debts, as is written in Matthew 6:12. It is a debt which binds over to the wrath of God. Why should we love sin? Does any man love to be in debt in sin? Sin is a disease. The whole head is sick, Isaiah 1:5. And will you love sin? Will any man hug a disease? Will he love his plague sores? Sin is a pollution. The apostle calls it filthiness. It is compared to leprosy and the poison of asps, of serpents. God's heart rises against sinners. My soul hated them, Zechariah 11:8. Soul is a misshapen monster. Lust makes a man brutish. Malice makes him devilish. What is in sin to be loved? Shall we love deformity? Sin is an enemy. It is compared to a serpent. It has 4 stings: shame, guilt, horror, death. Will a man love that which seeks his death? Surely then it is better to love God than sin. God will save you. Sin will damn you. Is he not become foolish who loves damnation? And here is just such a simple truth, right? You can always love the things of the world too much. You can love any created thing far, far too much. But can you love God too much? And the answer is no. You cannot love God too much. Rather, it's your weakness, it's your sin that you do not love God enough. But to love God, that's the only right thing to do. Because sin, what good is it to love sin? Will not sin just condemn you? Sin, that's the thing that seeks to kill you. Would you love that? Would you love your sin? And again, he really just emphasizes this point, right? There's just nothing to be loved about sin. Sin will condemn you. Sin will bring God's wrath upon you. There's nothing to be loved about sin. Same as, loving a partner who just is poisoning you. There's just nothing to be loved in a partner like that. Rather, love God instead. You cannot love God too much. So, labor to love God more, right? Oh, every Christian, isn't that their great prayer and thing they mourn over? I simply do not love God enough. So, here, some personal thoughts again. It's a shorter read, but again, another comfort for those who are going through a time of trial. Personally, I was going through a time of trial too, so I was reading Crook and a lot. All things were good. Christian, the red jewel of Christian contentment. And again, it just reminds you to just look to God, love God, be thankful to God even in these more difficult times. Because in these more typical times, it's so easy to just become embittered towards God. It's so easy to murmur against God. And it's so easy to forget that God does use all things for good. When things are good, we quote Romans 8:28. But when things are terrible, then we hesitate. We just start to think, God is just unfair and unjust towards me. But here, God truly does use all things for your good. Because you are called according to his purpose. So God, he does work all things for you. For your good. And really, all these afflictions, it's hard to get into that frame of mind, that frame of spirit where we just thank God, thank you for giving me this trial, so that I might love the world less. I might love created things less. And instead, love you more, right? So, Watson, again, he gives us so much biblical wisdom in just how to approach suffering, why it's a good thing, and again, it's just focusing the mind on just looking towards God. I think that's the most difficult part. Once suffering comes, we do become just so nearsighted, right? We're just focused on the now, on what's happening, on the pain, but God, he's always looking forward to our good in the long term. He will come back. His presence will return. He's making us more like Christ. These afflictions, they make the godly Christians more like Christ. And it increases our love for God. It takes away our love for sin. And again, as humans, our love is just so finite. It's so limited. My love is split between, God and many other things. But it's such a good service that God does me when he takes my love from all these things and redirects it to him. So, God, he's infinite in his wisdom, so much wiser than I am. And really, he is truly good. That's why Paul can say that, all things work together for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. God, he knows what is best for you and for me. So, Watson, again, Thomas, easy recommendation for me. 136 pages, relatively short. But if you're going through a time of trial and you need some encouragement, Watson, he will give it to you. And he will encourage you, your heart, not to love sin, not to love the creature, but love God. Give your affection wholly to God. You cannot love him too much. That was just such a wonderful point from him. So thank you again for watching this video, and hope to see you in the next video. Grace to you, and peace.